They say money screams, but wealth whispers. Harrison Sterling thought he was the loudest man in New York City. He thought casting aside his boring wife, Serafina, was just another business transaction stripping a liability from his balance sheet. He signed the divorce papers with a Mont Blanc pen and a smirk, literally laughing as the ink dried. He didn't know that the woman sitting across from him wasn't just losing a husband. She was activating a clause in a dormant family trust that predated the Federal Reserve. A trust worth not billions, but trillions. And the moment he signed, he didn't just divorce his wife. He fired his own landlord. The conference room on the 48th floor of the Seagram building was cold-tailored and smelled faintly of lemon polish and aggressive cologne. Outside the Manhattan skyline was a jagged jaw of steel and glass chewing on the grey October clouds. Inside the atmosphere was even more hostile. Harrison Sterling checked his Patek Philippe watch for the third time in 2 minutes. He didn't have time for this. He had a lunch reservation at Le Bernardin with Jessica, his executive assistant, and the primary reason he was currently sitting across from the woman he had vowed to love forever only 7 years ago. "Can we speed this up?" Harrison tapped his fingers on the mahogany table. "I have a board meeting at 2. This needs to be done." Serafina sat perfectly still. She wore a charcoal dress that Harrison had always hated. He said it made her look like a governess. Her hands were folded in her lap, her face pale and unreadable. She looked small in the high-backed leather chair. To Harrison, she looked defeated. That was exactly how he liked his opponents. "We are just reviewing the final addendum regarding the Hamptons property, Mr. Sterling," Serafina's lawyer said. He was an older man named Arthur Penhaligon, wearing a suit that looked like it had been purchased during the Nixon administration. Harrison's own legal team, 3 sharks from Skadden Arps, looked at Penhaligon with barely concealed disdain. "Keep the Hamptons house." Harrison laughed, a sharp, barking sound. He picked up the heavy document. "It's a money pit anyway. Consider it a parting gift. I'll keep the penthouse on 57th and the portfolio, as agreed." "As agreed," Penhaligon said softly. He slid the papers across the table. Harrison didn't even read them. Why would he? He was the CEO of Sterling Dynamics. He negotiated mergers with hostile foreign governments. He had crushed competitors into dust. Serafina was a librarian he'd met at a charity gala. She was quiet, unassuming, and frankly boring. She had no fight in her. That was why he married her. She was safe. And that was why he was leaving her. She was invisible. He uncapped his pen. The nib hovered over the signature line. "You're sure about this, Harrison?" Serafina spoke for the first time. Her voice was low, devoid of tears. It wasn't a plea. It sounded almost like a warning. Harrison looked up, a cruel grin stretching his face. "Serafina, darling, I haven't been in this sure about anything since I shorted the housing market in 2008. I'm doing you a favor. You can go back to your books and your cats. I need a partner who can keep up with the world I live in." He signed his name with a flourish. Harrison J. Sterling. He pushed the papers back, leaning back in his chair, chuckling. "There. Done. Free man." One of his lawyers, a sharp-faced woman named Collins, gathered the papers quickly. "We will file these within the hour. The divorce will be finalized by close of business." "Perfect." Harrison stood up, buttoning his Tom Ford jacket. He looked down at Serafina. She hadn't moved. She was staring at his signature, a strange look in her eyes. Not sadness. It looked like pity. Don't look so tragic, Sarah, Harrison mocked. You're walking away with $5 million. That's more money than your father made in his entire life. My father, Serafina said, standing up slowly, was a man of principles, something you wouldn't understand. Principles don't buy Gulf Streams. Harrison shot back, checking his phone. Jessica had texted, "Champagne is on ice. Hurry." "Goodbye, Serafina. Have a nice life." He turned on his heel and marched out of the conference room, his lawyers trailing him like a school of remora fish. He was laughing as he hit the elevator button. He felt lighter. He felt invincible. He had shed the dead weight. Back in the conference room, the silence stretched. Arthur Penhaligon took off his wire-rimmed glasses and began to polish them with a handkerchief. "He signed the Section 8 waiver," Arthur said quietly. "He did," Serafina replied. Her posture shifted. The smallness evaporated. She stood straighter, her chin lifting. The vibe of the defeated governess vanished, replaced by a cold, aristocratic steeliness that Harrison had never seen, because he never bothered to look. "Did he read the clause regarding the originating assets?" Arthur asked. "He didn't read anything. He never does when he thinks he's the smartest person in the room." Serafina walked to the window looking out at the city. She spotted the Sterling Dynamics Tower a few blocks away. "Activate the protocol, Arthur." "Are you certain Mrs. Sterling or, I should say, Ms. Caldwell?" "I'm certain," she said. "He wanted a world where only money talks. I think it's time he heard what $1 trillion sounds like." 3 days passed. Harrison lived in a blur of celebration. He and Jessica had flown to St. Bart's for the weekend, racking up a bill that would make a small country weep. He felt untouchable. On Tuesday morning, reality began to glitch. It started small. Harrison was standing in the lobby of the Sterling Dynamics headquarters, a monolithic skyscraper in Midtown Manhattan. He stopped at the exclusive coffee bar in the lobby, the one reserved for C-suite executives. "Double espresso black," Harrison ordered, tapping his phone. The barista, a young man who usually looked at Harrison with terrified awe, frowned at the register. "I'm sorry, Mr. Sterling. The system isn't accepting your employee ID for the charge." Harrison rolled his eyes. "It's a glitch. Just put it on my tab." I can't, sir. The system says user unauthorized. It says you're listed as external guest." Harrison scoffed. "External guest, I own the building. Or my company does. Just give me the coffee." He snatched the cup and walked toward the private elevators. He swiped his security badge. The light flashed red. Access denied. He swiped again. Red. "What is going on here?" Harrison shouted. The security guard at the desk, a man named Miller, who had worked there for 10 years, stood up slowly. "Miss Sterling, sir, I'm getting an alert here. Your clearance has been revoked." "Revoked by who I am?" "The CEO." Harrison's face flushed a deep crimson. People were staring. Junior analysts were whispering behind their hands. "I don't know, sir. The order came from the building ownership group. Sterling Real Estate Holdings owns this building. Miller, I sign your checks." Harrison pulled out his phone to call his COO, but before he could dial a man, approached him. He wasn't security. He was wearing a bespoke suit, clearly Savile Row, and carried a slim leather briefcase. He looked Swiss. "Mr. Harrison Sterling?" the man asked. His accent was thick, precise, and European. "Who the hell are you?" "My name is Elias Thorne. I represent the Caldwell Sovereign Trust. I believe we have an appointment." "I don't know what that is, and I don't have appointments with people who stand in lobbies," Harrison snarled. "Get out of my way." "Mr. Sterling," Thorne said, his voice cutting through the noise of the lobby like a scalpel. "The Caldwell Sovereign Trust is the entity that owns the land this building stands on. As of 9 a.m. this morning, per the terms of your recent divorce settlement, the 99-year lease granted to Sterling Dynamics has been terminated due to a moral turpitude and violation of beneficiary clause." Harrison froze. The words didn't make sense. "The land." "We own the land." "You own the structure," Thorne corrected gently. "You do not own the earth beneath it. The land was leased to your company in 2015 for a token sum of $1 a year. A favor from the landholder." "Who is the landholder?" Harrison demanded. "Who is Caldwell?" Thorne smiled. It was a professional, devastating smile. "The sole beneficiary of the Caldwell Sovereign Trust is your ex-wife, Serafina Caldwell. You signed the waiver on Friday. By divorcing her, you severed the familial bond that allowed the $1 lease to exist. The rent has been recalculated to market value, plus a punitive multiplier for hostile separation." Harrison felt the blood drain from his face. "Serafina. Serafina doesn't have a trust. Her father was a high school history teacher in Connecticut. Her father, Thorne said, was the last male heir to the Blackwood-Caldwell banking dynasty. He chose a quiet life. He rejected the money. But the trust remained. It accumulated interest for 40 years. It owns significant portions of Manhattan, including this city block, the Port Authority land in New Jersey, your logistics fleet uses, and the fiber-optic network grid under the financial district." Harrison laughed nervously. "This is a joke. Serafina put you up to this." "It's a prank." Thorne opened his briefcase and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was a photocopy of the document Harrison had signed, laughing on Friday. Highlighted in yellow was a paragraph he hadn't read. Subsection 4. Be upon dissolution of marriage, initiated by the non-blood party. Harrison Sterling, all rights to the Caldwell land grants revert immediately to the trust. Commercial tenants, Sterling Dynamics, shall vacate within 48 hours or face immediate asset seizure. "She can't evict a Fortune 500 company," Harrison whispered. "She isn't evicting the company, Mr. Sterling," Thorne said. "She is evicting you. The board of directors of Sterling Dynamics has already been notified. They are currently in an emergency session on the 50th floor. They have a choice: pay the new rent, which is currently set at $50 million per month, or remove the CEO who caused the lease violation." Harrison's phone buzzed. It was a text from the chairman of his board. "Don't bother coming up. You're out. Security will escort you." Harrison dropped the phone. The screen shattered on the marble floor he thought he owned. "She wants to see you," Thorne said. "Who, the board?" "No." Thorne closed his briefcase. "Ms. Caldwell. She is waiting at the vault." "The vault? What vault?" "The Federal Reserve Bank of New York. Vault B. The trust is finalizing the transfer of your personal assets. You see, Mr. Sterling, you leveraged your personal stock options against the company's stability. Since the company is now technically insolvent due to the lease crisis, the bank has called in your loans." Harrison stared at the man. His world was disintegrating in real time. "My assets, all of them." "You kept the portfolio as agreed," Thorne reminded him. "But the portfolio is leveraged debt. Serafina kept the principals, as you called them. And it turns out the Caldwell principals are backed by gold bullion." Harrison grabbed Thorne by the lapels. "Take me to her." He had to fix this. He could charm her. He could bully her. He could do something. Serafina was weak. She was a librarian. This had to be a mistake. But as he was escorted out of his own building, not by his security team, but by 2 NYPD officers who were waiting outside Harrison Sterling, realized the laughing had stopped. The drama was just beginning. The ride to 33 Liberty Street, the fortress-like headquarters of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, was executed in terrifying silence. Harrison Sterling sat in the back of a black armored SUV, sandwiched between two men who looked less like lawyers and more like private military contractors. They didn't speak. They didn't look at him. They simply stared forward, their presence a heavy reminder that Harrison was no longer the one holding the leash. When the vehicle stopped, it wasn't at the main entrance where tourists lined up for tours. It was a secure subterranean bay. Harrison was ushered out, his Italian leather shoes clicking nervously on the polished concrete. "Phone and watch Mr. Sterling," a security officer said. He stood behind a blast-proof glass partition. "This is ridiculous. I am a CEO. I need my device," Harrison snapped, though his voice lacked its usual thunder. "Phone and watch," the officer repeated, his tone flat. "And the cufflinks, they set off the scanner." Harrison stripped himself of his armor. The Patek Philippe, the iPhone 15 Pro, the Platinum, cufflinks. Without them, he felt naked. He was led through a series of checkpoints, each more rigorous than the last, until they reached the elevators that descended 80 feet below sea level into the bedrock of Manhattan. The air down here changed. It was cold, recycled, and carried a metallic scent, the smell of stagnant, compressed wealth. The elevator opened to reveal the legendary gold vault. Harrison had heard stories, of course. He knew that nations stored their bullion here. He expected to see bars of gold. What he didn't expect was to see Serafina standing in the center of the viewing cage, looking like the queen of the underworld. She had changed. Gone was the shapeless gray wool dress she had worn in the conference room. She was wearing a tailored white suit, sharp and architectural, that made her glow against the dim amber lighting of the vault. Her hair, usually pulled back in a severe bun, was loose, cascading over her shoulders. She didn't look like a librarian anymore. She looked like a deity. Standing next to her was the governor of the Federal Reserve Bank. The actual governor. He was nodding deferentially at something she was saying. "Harrison," Serafina said. She didn't turn around fully. She just angled her head. "You're late." "I was detained by your goons," Harrison hissed, walking up to the heavy steel bars that separated them from the stacks of gold. "Serafina, what is this?" "The lease the building you've made your point." "You want more alimony?" "Fine. We can renegotiate. 10 million. But call off the dogs." The governor excused himself, giving Harrison a look of pity before disappearing into the shadows. They were alone, save for the silent guards at the perimeter. "Look at it, Harrison." Serafina pointed through the bars. "Do you know whose gold this is? It's the Fed's. It belongs to countries. France, Germany, Italy." "Some of it," she admitted. She pointed to a massive stack of dull yellow bars in the far corner, a stack that reached the ceiling. "Compartment 104. That stack belongs to the Caldwell Sovereign Trust. My family." Harrison stared. The stack was immense. Hundreds of millions of dollars, maybe billions. "My great-grandfather, Elias Caldwell, didn't trust the markets in 1929, Serafina said softly. He converted everything. Real estate, rail bonds, steel mills. He turned it all into metal and land. He erased our name from the social registers. He taught us that true power isn't being on the cover of Forbes. True power is being the reason the people on the cover of Forbes can pay their payroll." Harrison felt a wave of nausea. "You lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in Queens when I met you. You drove a Honda. I wanted to be sure." She turned to face him now, her eyes clear and devastatingly calm. I have access to more capital than God, Harrison. I didn't need a provider. I needed a partner. I needed someone who loved me. Serafina, the quiet woman who liked books and rainy days. I needed to know that if the money vanished, the man would stay. She took a step closer to the bars. And for 3 years you were wonderful. But then, Sterling Dynamics went public, and you changed. You became obsessed with status. You started mocking the very simplicity that I loved. You started hiding assets. You started sleeping with your assistant. Harrison flinched. Jessica meant nothing. Jessica meant everything, Serafina corrected, because she represented what you really wanted, something shiny, shallow, and expensive. You signed that divorce decree, laughing, Harrison. I watched you. You were so happy to be rid of me, because you thought I was a burden. I didn't know, Harrison stammered. If I had known, that is exactly the point. Serafina's voice raised for the first time, echoing off the steel walls. If you had known, you would have stayed. But you wouldn't have stayed for me. You would have stayed for this. She gestured to the gold. So what now? Harrison tried to regain his composure. He squared his shoulders. You have money. Congratulations. I have my company. I built Sterling Dynamics. I'll find a new building. I'll fight the eviction in court. I have lawyers too, Serafina. Serafina sighed, a sound of genuine disappointment. She signaled to Elias Thorne, the Swiss lawyer who had appeared from the shadows. Mr. Sterling, Thorne said, opening a leather folio. You don't seem to understand the liquidity crisis you are currently facing. I have 50 million in personal holdings, Harrison spat. I'm fine. You had 50 million in equity, Thorne corrected. However, your personal wealth was tied to a line of credit from First Manhattan Bank. You used your Sterling Dynamics stock as collateral to buy your penthouse, your yacht, and your stake in that winery in Napa. So, First Manhattan Bank, Thorne said, peering over his glasses, is a subsidiary of the Caldwell Financial Group. When Sterling Dynamics lost its lease this morning, the stock price plummeted 40% in pre-market trading. That triggered a margin call on your personal loans. Harrison stopped breathing. A margin call. The bank has exercised its right to seize collateral to cover the spread. Thorne continued, flipping a page. As of 10 a.m., the bank has seized your stock. But since the stock is crashing, it wasn't enough to cover the debt. So they have moved to secondary assets. Your penthouse, the yacht, the cars. Your accounts have been frozen pending liquidation. Harrison looked at Serafina. She wasn't smiling. She looked sad. You're bankrupt, Harrison, she said quietly. Actually, you're worse than bankrupt. You owe the trust about $12 million. We are garnishing your future wages. You can't do this, Harrison whispered. This is vindictive. This is insane. It's business, Serafina said, using the exact tone Harrison had used on her in the conference room 3 days ago. It's a transaction. I'm stripping a liability from my balance sheet. She turned to leave. Wait. Harrison lunged at the bars, grabbing the cold steel. Serafina, you can't leave me with nothing. We were married. She paused and looked back over her shoulder. You left with exactly what you negotiated, Harrison. You kept the portfolio. I kept the principles. It just so happens that your portfolio was built on sand, and my principles are built on gold. How am I supposed to live? He shouted, his voice cracking. I have nowhere to go. Serafina looked at Thorne. Give him the stipend. Thorne reached into his pocket and pulled out a small white envelope. He slid it through the bars. Harrison stared at it on the floor. "What is this? The same amount you gave Serafina for incidentals during the separation," Thorne said. $5,000. Cash. Consider it a parting gift." Serafina walked toward the elevator. The governor opened the gate for her. "Serafina." Harrison screamed, the sound tearing at his throat. "Sarah, please." The heavy steel doors of the elevator slid shut, cutting off the vision of the woman in white. Harrison Sterling was left standing in the subterranean cold, staring at $1 billion of gold he couldn't touch with $5,000 in an envelope at his feet. The humiliation didn't end in the vault. That was merely the prelude. The true dismantling of Harrison Sterling happened in the public eye, under the grey, weeping sky of Manhattan. Security escorted him out of the Federal Reserve, not through the main exit, but through a side door that spilled out onto Maiden Lane. They handed him a plastic bag containing his phone and watch. "You are not permitted to re-enter the premises," the guard said, closing the heavy metal door. The bolt slid home with a sound like a gunshot. Harrison stood on the sidewalk. It had started to rain, a cold, stinging drizzle that soaked through his Tom Ford suit within seconds. He fumbled for his phone. He needed to call Jessica. She was the only thing he had left. She would understand. They could go to the Hamptons' house. Wait, no, he had given that to Serafina. They could go to a hotel. He turned on his phone. It exploded with notifications. WSJ alert. Sterling Dynamics stock. Plummets 60% after lease scandal. CNBC. Harrison Sterling. Ousted as CEO. Page 6. The $1 trillion divorce. Who is the mystery heiress? He ignored them all and dialed Jessica. Pick up, he muttered, wiping rain from his eyes. "Harrison." Her voice was tight, high-pitched. "Jess, thank God. Listen, it's a mess. A total mess. Serafina, she's insane. She has these lawyers. They froze the accounts. I need you to pack a bag. Pack the jewelry, the cash in the safe, everything. Meet me at the St. Regis. I'll explain everything when I—" "Harrison, I can't," Jessica interrupted. "What do you mean you can't?" "Just get a cab. No, I mean, the police are here." Harrison froze in the middle of the sidewalk. A pedestrian bumped into him and cursed, but he didn't notice. "The police at the penthouse. They're evicting us." "Harrison." Jessica was crying now, but it sounded like angry tears, not sympathetic ones. "They said the apartment belongs to the bank. They gave me 10 minutes to gather my personal belongings. They're watching me pack." "Put them on the phone!" Harrison roared. "That is my property. They said it's not." "And Harrison, my cards aren't working. I tried to Uber to my sister's and it declined. You said I was an authorized user on the black card. The accounts are frozen, Jess. Just wait for me downstairs. I'm coming." "No," she said. The crying stopped abruptly. "What?" "I checked the news, Harrison. They're saying you're ruined. They're saying you're liable for corporate negligence. I can't be seen with you. My modeling agency, they'll drop me if I'm tied to a fraud case." "I am not a fraud. I am Harrison Sterling. You're a broke 45-year-old man who just lost his company," Jessica said, her voice turning ice cold. "Don't call me again." The line went dead. Harrison stared at the phone. He felt a laugh bubbling up in his chest, a hysterical, jagged thing. She was gone. The moment the credit limit hit 0, the love evaporated. Serafina's words in the vault echoed in his mind. I needed to know that if the money vanished, the man would stay. He put the phone in his pocket. He had to get to the penthouse. He had to save something. There was a Patek Philippe Nautilus in the safe worth $200,000. If he could just get that, he had a lifeline. He hailed a taxi. 57th and Park, he ordered. The driver looked at him in the rearview mirror. Harrison looked like a maniac, soaked hair water dripping off his nose, eyes wild. "You got cash, buddy, card machine is broken." Harrison remembered the envelope. He tore it open. $5,000 in crisp hundreds. He threw a $100 bill at the driver. "Just drive." The ride to Billionaires Row took 40 minutes in the gridlock. When the taxi pulled up to the limestone facade of his building, one of the most exclusive co-ops in the city, Harrison didn't wait for the change. He jumped out and ran toward the awning. Usually the doorman, a burly Irishman named Patrick, would rush to open the door, greeting him with a smile and a "Good evening, Mr. Sterling." Today Patrick stood in front of the door, arms crossed. Two other men, private security in dark blazers, stood behind him. "Patrick, get out of the way," Harrison commanded, reaching for the handle. Patrick didn't move. He was a big man, and for the first time, Harrison noticed how intimidating he actually was. "I can't let you in, Mr. Sterling. I live here, I own the penthouse." "Not anymore, sir. The co-op board held an emergency vote an hour ago, triggered by the foreclosure notice from First Manhattan. You've been designated a persona non grata. All fobs have been deactivated." "You can't do this. My clothes are in there. My life is in there. Your personal effects that were deemed non-asset are being boxed up as we speak," Patrick said, his face impassive. "They will be shipped to a storage facility in the Bronx. You can pick them up on Thursday." "The Bronx!" Harrison screamed. He lunged for the door. Patrick caught him by the chest, holding him back with humiliating ease. "Don't do it, sir. Don't make me call the cops. You know the NYPD is already looking for a reason to talk to you about the company funds." Harrison stumbled back, gasping for air. The rain was coming down harder now. Passers-by were stopping. Phones were out. They were filming him. Harrison Sterling, the titan of industry, fighting a doorman in the rain. He turned away, shielding his face. He had to get off the street. He walked 2 blocks to the St. Regis Hotel. He walked up to the reception desk, dripping water on the marble floor. The concierge, a man Harrison had tipped thousands of dollars to over the years, looked up. His smile was tight, polite, and completely barring. "Mr. Sterling," the concierge said before Harrison could speak, "we are unfortunately fully booked this evening." "The hell you are," Harrison said, leaning on the counter. "I stay here 3 times a month. You always have the presidential suite." "We are fully booked for you, sir," the concierge said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Management received a call from the ownership group." "Who owns this hotel?" Harrison demanded. "The building is owned by a holding company," the concierge said. "Sovereign Hospitality." Harrison closed his eyes. Sovereign. Serafina. She owns the hotel. "The trust has a majority stake in the real estate, sir. We were instructed that providing you with accommodation would be a violation of the conflict of interest policy. I'm sorry, Harrison. Truly." Harrison turned around. The lobby of the St. Regis, with its crystal chandeliers and gold leaf ceilings, spun around him. He walked back out into the rain. He had thousands of dollars in his pocket, but nowhere to sleep. He was blacklisted. It wasn't just the money. Serafina was systematically turning off the lights in his world. She was showing him that his entire existence, the clubs, the hotels, the status wasn't something he earned. It was a playground built by people like her, and he had just been kicked out of the sandbox. He found himself walking aimlessly down Fifth Avenue. He passed the stores he used to shop in: Gucci, Tiffany's, Bergdorf Goodman. They all seemed like fortresses now impenetrable and hostile. His phone buzzed again. An incoming call, unknown number. He answered it, desperate for a friendly voice. "Hello, Harrison." It was a voice he recognized. Carter Bennett, his best friend, his college roommate, a hedge fund manager worth $3 billion. "Carter," Harrison almost sobbed. "Carter, you have to help me. It's a nightmare. Serafina is doing something. Legal jiu-jitsu. They locked me out of the apartment. Can I crash at your place in Tribeca, just for a night until I get my lawyers to fix this?" There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Harrison, look," Carter said, his voice awkward. "I can't really do that." "Why not? We've been friends for 20 years. "Yeah, but my fund, the Bennett Group." Carter cleared his throat. "Our biggest LP, our biggest investor, is the Caldwell Trust. They provide 40% of our capital." Harrison stopped walking. He stared at a puddle on the ground, watching the raindrops create ripples that vanished in an instant. "She called you," Harrison said dully. "Her lawyers did," Carter admitted. "They implied that if I offered aid and comfort to a known financial liability, they might reconsider their allocation strategy. They might pull their money, Harrison. I can't lose 40% of the fund. I have investors. I have a wife." "She's blackmailing the whole city," Harrison whispered. "She's not blackmailing anyone," Carter said, and for the first time, he sounded fearful. "She's just calling in the debts. She's the ocean, Harrison. You don't fight the ocean. I'm sorry. Good luck." The line clicked dead. Harrison stood alone on the corner of 5th and 57th. He was wet, shivering, and holding a plastic bag with a dead phone. He had $4,900 in his pocket, but in the world he used to inhabit, he was destitute. He looked up at the towering skyscrapers, disappearing into the mist. He used to think he was one of the giants who built them. Now he realized he was just a tenant. And the landlord had just changed the locks. He needed a plan. He couldn't stay in Manhattan. The city was hers. He needed to go somewhere she couldn't reach him. Somewhere off the grid. He flagged down a yellow cab. "Where to?" the driver asked. Harrison thought for a moment. He couldn't go to the airport. His passport was likely flagged or in the penthouse. He couldn't go to a luxury hotel. "Take me to New Jersey," Harrison said. "Just find me a Motel 6 and keep driving until I tell you to stop." As the taxi crossed the George Washington Bridge, leaving the glittering skyline of New York behind Harrison, Sterling didn't look back. He was beginning to understand that the divorce papers were not the end of his marriage. They were the beginning of his penance. But Harrison wasn't done yet. He still had one secret Serafina didn't know about. A ledger. A digital key to a crypto wallet he had set up years ago, hidden under a floorboard in a hunting cabin in the Catskills. It wasn't billions, but it was enough to disappear. He just had to get there before she remembered the cabin existed. Harrison Sterling had spent nights in the presidential suite of the Four Seasons in Tokyo and on the deck of yachts in the Mediterranean. He had never spent a night in the Motel 6 off Exit 14 on the New Jersey Turnpike. The room smelled of stale tobacco and industrial cleaner. The sheets were thin, scratchy polyester. Harrison lay awake, staring at the popcorn ceiling, listening to the roar of trucks on the highway. He was wearing a tracksuit he had purchased at a 24-hour Walmart, having discarded his ruined Tom Ford suit in a dumpster behind a Denny's. He felt like a ghost. In 24 hours, he had gone from a master of the universe to a man who had to count the change in his pocket to buy a bottle of water. but he wasn't dead yet. As dawn broke bleeding, a sickly grey light through the curtains, Harrison formulated his move. He had $3,800 left. It was enough to get him to the Foxhole. The Foxhole was a hunting cabin deep in the Catskill Mountains, 2 hours north of the city. Harrison had bought it 5 years ago, through a labyrinth of shell companies, starting in the Cayman Islands and ending with a generic LLC called Blue Heron Properties. It didn't appear on any tax return. It wasn't in his name. It was his doomsday bunker. And buried beneath the floorboards of the master closet inside a fireproof safe was a Ledger Nano S hardware wallet. It contained the private keys to $20 million in Bitcoin and Ethereum. "She doesn't know," Harrison whispered to himself, swinging his legs out of bed. "She knows the banks. She knows the real estate. She doesn't know the blockchain." He took a cab to a shady used car lot in Newark. For $2,500 cash, he bought a beat-up 2012 Ford Focus with a cracked windshield and a check engine light that glowed like a demonic eye. He didn't care. It had wheels. The drive north was a white-knuckle blur. Harrison kept checking the rearview mirror, convinced he was being followed. Every black SUV made his heart hammer against his ribs. But the road remained clear. The further he got from the city, the more the trees closed in their autumn leaves, looking like fire against the grey sky. By the time he turned onto the gravel access road leading to the cabin, it was late afternoon. The woods were silent, save for the caw of a crow. The cabin looked exactly as he had left it 6 months ago. A rustic A-frame made of dark cedar nestled in a clearing of pines. It looked abandoned. It looked safe. Harrison parked the car behind a shed to hide it from the main road. He walked up the porch steps, the wood creaking loudly in the stillness. He reached above the doorframe for the spare key he had hidden inside a hollowed-out knot in the wood. His fingers brushed against something. Not metal. Paper. He froze. He pulled his hand back. There was no key. There was a folded piece of heavy, cream-colored cardstock wedged into the hiding spot. Harrison's breath hitched. He unfolded the paper. It was blank. "Paranoia," he muttered. "Just paranoia." The wind blew it there. He didn't need the key. He grabbed a heavy stone from the garden and smashed the glass pane of the back door. He reached in, unlocked the latch, and stumbled into the kitchen. The air inside was freezing colder than the outside. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light, cutting through the gloom. Harrison didn't waste time. He ran to the bedroom, threw open the closet door, and fell to his knees. He clawed at the edge of the floor rug, throwing it aside. There underneath was the loose floorboard. He pried it up with his fingernails, ignoring the splinter that drove itself into his thumb. The hole was dark. He used his cheap burner phone as a flashlight. The safe was there. A small black Sentry safe. Harrison let out a sob of relief. Yes. Yes. He dialed in the combination 042188, his own birthday. The lock clicked. The door swung open. Harrison reached inside. His hand closed around the cold, brushed metal of the USB drive. He pulled it out and kissed it. $20 million. It was enough to start over. He could fly to a non-extradition country. He could buy a new identity. He could live like a king in Thailand or Brazil. He stood up, clutching the drive. He felt the rush of adrenaline returning. He was Harrison Sterling. He had outsmarted the trust. He had beaten Serafina. He walked into the living room to find the satellite laptop he kept hidden in the pantry. He needed to verify the funds and transfer them to a Mixer wallet immediately. He set the laptop on the dusty dining table and powered it up. The screen flickered to life. He plugged in the USB drive. He navigated to the wallet interface. His hands were shaking so hard he could barely type the PIN. PIN accepted. Loading wallet balance. Harrison held his breath. Balance 0.00000000 BTC. Harrison stared. He blinked. He hit refresh. Balance 0.00000000 Bitcoin. No, he whispered. No, that's impossible. It's cold storage. It's offline. He clicked on the Transaction History tab. There was one transaction. It was dated yesterday. Sent 450.00 Bitcoin. Recipient. Wallet address. Memo. Contribution to the Serafina Caldwell Arts Foundation. Harrison screamed. He swept the laptop off the table, sending it crashing against the wall. How? He roared at the empty room. How did she know? The silence of the cabin was his only answer. And then the landline phone on the kitchen wall, a rotary phone that Harrison kept purely for aesthetic reasons, a phone that shouldn't even have service, began to ring. The ringing was loud, shrill, and impossible. The line had been dead for 2 years. Harrison had cancelled the service himself to ensure total isolation. Ring. Harrison backed away from it, as if it were a bomb. He bumped into the kitchen counter. Ring. He couldn't ignore it. It was calling to him a siren song from the hell his life had become. Slowly, with a trembling hand, he picked up the receiver and held it to his ear. He didn't speak. "Hello, Harrison," a voice said. It wasn't Serafina. It was a male voice, calm, slightly bored with the distinct nasal quality of a tech support agent. "Who is this?" Harrison croaked. "This is Kevin, from IT." Harrison's mind raced. "Kevin? I don't know a Kevin." "Sure you do," the voice chirped. "Kevin, from the 14th floor. You hired me 3 years ago to set up a secure, untraceable crypto architecture for your, what did you call it? Your rainy day fund." Harrison remembered. The kid with the glasses and the anime t-shirts. The genius he had paid $10,000 in cash to set this up. "You..." Harrison gripped the phone tighter. "You gave her the keys I paid you. I made you sign an NDA." "Yeah, about that." Kevin said, the sound of typing clicking in the background. "See, Ms. Caldwell, or rather the Trust's forensic accounting team, found the cash withdrawal you used to pay me. It was marked office supplies in the ledger, but you took it from the petty cash account of Sterling Dynamics. So since you used company funds to pay for the setup, and you used a company laptop to generate the seed phrase initially, the wallet is technically company property. And since the trust now effectively owns Sterling Dynamics, due to the insolvency proceedings..." "You stole my money," Harrison screamed. "We recovered corporate assets," Kevin corrected. "Actually, Ms. Caldwell was very generous. She decided not to press charges for embezzlement. She just wanted the donation for her foundation. She loves the arts, you know." Harrison slammed the phone down. He ripped the cord out of the wall. He looked around the cabin. It felt like the walls were closing in. He had to leave. He had to run. If they knew about the cabin, the police weren't far behind. He grabbed his car keys and bolted for the back door. He burst out onto the porch and stopped dead. The gravel driveway was no longer empty. Blocking his beat-up Ford Focus was a sleek, matte black Range Rover. Leaning against the hood, cleaning a pair of wire-rimmed spectacles with a silk handkerchief, was Arthur Penhaligon. Standing next to him were two uniformed New York State troopers. Harrison dropped the keys. They landed in the dead leaves with a soft thud. "Mr. Sterling," Arthur said, placing his glasses back on his nose. "I must say you are a difficult man to schedule a meeting with." "Get off my property," Harrison said, though the fight had drained out of him. He sounded like a child. "Your property." Arthur raised an eyebrow. He pulled a file from the passenger seat of the Range Rover. "Blue Heron Properties, LLC, incorporated in Delaware." "Yes," Harrison said. "It's mine." "It was," Arthur corrected. "You see, Blue Heron Properties failed to pay its annual registration fee in Delaware last month, an administrative oversight on your part. I assume you were busy with the divorce." Harrison felt his knees weaken. He had forgotten. He had forgotten the $300 fee. When an LLC goes dormant for non-payment, Arthur explained, his voice sounding like a lecture on contract law, its name becomes available. The Caldwell Trust re-registered Blue Heron Properties, LLC 2 days ago. We paid the back taxes. We assumed the assets, including this charming, albeit drafty cabin. Arthur gestured to the troopers. "Officer, this man is trespassing on private land owned by the trust. He has also, I believe, broken a window to gain entry. That is breaking and entering." The trooper stepped forward, his hand resting on his belt. "Harrison Sterling." Harrison looked at the woods. He could run. He could bolt into the trees. But where would he go? He had no money, no car, no coat. It was dropping below freezing tonight. He looked at Arthur. "She planned this. She knew I would come here." "Ms. Caldwell knows you better than you know yourself," Arthur said. "She knew you would seek out your safety net. She wanted to make sure you understood that there is no net, not anymore." "What does she want?" Harrison whispered. "She has the money. She has the company. She has the house. What else does she want?" Arthur walked up the porch steps, the wood groaning under his weight. He stopped inches from Harrison. "She wants an apology, Mr. Sterling. A real one." "An apology?" Harrison scoffed, a jagged, broken sound. "For what?" "For falling out of love." "No." Arthur said, his eyes hard behind the lenses. "For the laughter. You laughed when you signed the papers, Harrison. You treated her dignity like a joke. The trust doesn't care about your infidelity. But the Caldwells, they take manners very seriously." The trooper pulled out his handcuffs. "Turn around, sir." As the cold metal clicked around his wrists, Harrison looked at Arthur one last time. "Where are you taking me, Jail?" "Eventually," Arthur said, checking his watch. "But first we have a detour. Ms. Caldwell has requested your presence. She believes it is time to close the loop." "I'm not going back to the vault," Harrison said, panic rising. "Oh no." Arthur smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "We aren't going to the vault. We're going to the library." "The library? What library?" "The New York Public Library," Arthur said, opening the back door of the Range Rover. "The Rose Reading Room. It's where you met her, isn't it?" "She thinks it's poetic." Harrison was shoved into the back of the SUV. The leather smelled of expensive conditioner, the same smell as the conference room where this nightmare began. As the car crunched down the gravel drive, leaving the foxhole behind, Harrison realized he wasn't just broke. He was being erased, and the woman holding the eraser was waiting for him exactly where he had found her among the books. The New York Public Library at midnight is a cathedral of silence. The Rose Reading Room, usually buzzing with scholars and tourists, was empty. The vast ceiling with its murals of rolling clouds seemed to press down on the space below. Harrison Sterling walked down the center aisle, his footsteps echoing on the wood floor. The handcuffs had been removed by the troopers outside, leaving red welts on his wrists. Arthur Penhaligon walked a few paces behind him, a silent warden. At the far end of the room, sitting at a long oak table under the glow of a brass lamp, sat Serafina. She wasn't wearing the power suit from the vault. She was wearing a simple cardigan and jeans, the same outfit she had worn the day they met right here, 7 years ago. On the table sat a single leather-bound book. Harrison approached the table. He was exhausted, broken and shivering from the cold mountain air he had been dragged from. "This is where you spilled coffee on my thesis," Serafina said, not looking up from the book. "I remember," Harrison rasped. "I bought you a new laptop to make up for it." "You did." She looked up. Her eyes were tired. "You were kind then. You were ambitious, yes, but you were kind. You didn't know who I was. You didn't know about the trust or the gold or the buildings. You just saw a girl who was upset about her notes." "I loved you, Sarah," Harrison said, his voice cracking. "I really did." "I know," she said softly. "And I loved you. That's why this is so hard." "Then stop it." Harrison slammed his hand on the table. "Stop this insanity. You've stripped me of everything, my company, my home, my reputation. You've had me arrested. You've proved your point. You're powerful. You win. What more do you want?" Serafina closed the book. The sound was like a gavel striking a block. "I didn't strip you of everything, Harrison. The trust did. It's an automated system, a machine built by my ancestors to protect the family from predators." She slid the leather-bound book toward him. It was an old ledger, the paper yellowed with age. "Read the highlighted passage," she commanded. Harrison looked down. The handwriting was elegant, spidery script from the 19th century. It was the founding charter of the Caldwell Sovereign Trust. "In the event of a dissolution of marriage involving a beneficiary," Harrison read aloud, his voice trembling, "the disposition of assets shall be determined by the manner of the separation. Should the separation be mutual and sorrowful, the spouse shall be granted a life stipend. Should the separation be hostile, the trust shall defend." "But—" He stopped. "Read it," Serafina whispered. "But should the spouse exhibit joy, mirth, or mockery in the act of severance, proving that the union was held in contempt, the scorched earth protocol shall be enacted. The spouse shall be returned to the state in which they entered the world, naked of asset and name." Harrison stared at the words. The ink seemed to swim before his eyes. "Joy, mirth, or mockery," Serafina repeated. "You laughed, Harrison. You laughed when you signed the papers. You smirked at my lawyer. You checked your watch." I was nervous," Harrison lied. "You were relieved," she corrected. "You treated our marriage like a bad investment you were dumping. That laughter, it triggered the clause. If you had signed with a heavy heart, if you had shown even an ounce of regret, the trust would have given you half. You would have walked away with $50 billion. Harrison fell back into the chair opposite her. The air left his lungs. 50 billion. I laughed myself into poverty, he whispered. You laughed yourself out of a family, Serafina said. She stood up. The trust is satisfied. The debt is settled. The scorched earth protocol is complete. She placed a small object on the table. It was a train ticket. One way to Ohio, she said. I found your birth records. You grew up in Dayton. You have a cousin there. I can't go back there, Harrison said, tears streaming down his face. I'm Harrison Sterling. I belong in New York. Harrison Sterling doesn't exist anymore, she said, walking away from the table. The name Sterling was a brand you created. The trust owns the trademark now. Just Harrison again. She stopped at the exit of the Reading room and looked back. For a second the steeliness vanished, and he saw the woman he had married. I would have given it all up for you, you know, she said, her voice echoing in the vast, empty hall. If you had just asked me to stay instead of laughing at me to leave, I would have burned the trust to the ground to keep you. She turned and walked out into the darkness of the hallway. Arthur Penhaligon followed her, leaving Harrison alone in the pool of light. Harrison looked at the train ticket. Then he looked at the empty chair where his wife had sat. He started to laugh. It was a quiet, broken sound that bounced off the painted clouds on the ceiling. He laughed because there was nothing else left to do. The wealth had whispered, and he hadn't listened. Now, the silence was screaming. Harrison Sterling spent the rest of his life in Ohio, managing a mid-sized logistics center. He never remarried. He never bought another stock. And every time he saw the Manhattan skyline on television, he turned it off. It's a brutal reminder that in the high-stakes game of love and money, the most expensive thing you can do is underestimate the quiet person in the room. Harrison thought he was the main character, but he was just a line item in a ledger written 100 years ago. So here is the question for you. Do you think Serafina went too far? Was the scorched earth protocol justice for his arrogance, or was it cruel revenge? I want to know what you would have done if you held the keys to the trust. Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story of billion-dollar karma, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe. I release new stories of the rich, the powerful, and the secrets they hide every week. Thanks for watching.